Okay, let's just define masking right off the bat. Okay, let's just start with that. So develop mode, if I just go into develop mode, for example, okay, if you've used develop mode to edit an image, you've done a masking process. Um, in fact, actually, all forms of adjustments, right, have an application, right, in regards to what they do, their effect on an image. So if I crank the exposure on my image, you see the effect of that. Um, Technically speaking, this effect has a mask that's been applied to our whole image, right? Um, so this is going to be a universal change, right, to our image versus selective changes, which again, sort of masking is an image editing technique that is intended to select or isolate components of your image, right? So in ACDSee, we have the ability to do sort of selective adjustments and automated adjustments. And these create masks in develop mode. So if I was to click on AI subject, it would isolate what it perceives to be the main subject in my image versus, say, AI sky, which would select the sky in this image and then mask it from the rest of my image. Let's see how it does. Does a good job. It even gets the sort of like reflection, I guess, in the water here of the sky. But as you can see, the sky is then, and you know, the base portion of my image here, where the water, the reflection of the sky applies, um, the masking has selected a portion of my image. Um, so what we're going to be looking at is then after we've made a selection process, what we're going to go do moving forward is we're going to make some sort of change to this selection. And so, one of the things that I'm going to isolate and highlight is how selections and masks are linked, right? Um, a mask is the area that is isolated, and selection processes are the means by which you isolate an area to then go about making an effect to it. Masks in general, in ACDSee and their sort of selection process are sort of highlighted in this red portion here. So we're showing in this case the area that our changes are going to be applied, right? So to give an example of that, if I was to make, so I've made my mask of my sky here by using the AI selection process. If I was to increase the exposure in this area, you can see that the exposure is only applied to the area that I had selected. So if you've worked in develop mode, right, and you've worked with tools like the brush tool or these AI functions of selection, you've already engaged with a masking process. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these methods and we're going to take them into edit mode and apply them in different ways. And so we're going to look at selections and effect. We're going to look at intermediate sort of masking done without selection processes. And then we're going to look at sort of other forms of automated selection like channel selection and luminance and color range. Excuse me. Pardon me. Sneezing here. So I'm assuming that most people in this chat, right, have used develop mode to make brush adjustments or linear gradient adjustments. Can I just get like a yes or no if you've done those things? So mostly yeses so far. All the time. Yeah. Margaret says no, a couple no's. This is great because you've already worked with masking. Now we're going to add some complexity to this when it comes to working with layers, right? And then we'll explain it for more in depth for those who are less familiar with the concept. Okay, I'm going to move away from develop mode and we're going to move into edit mode because the edit mode will bring out more areas of conceptual areas of masking as we move into how to apply more advanced methods of masking. Let's go into this image right here. I'll open it up in edit mode and we'll talk about this. This is going to be a good image to work with this. So let's get a couple things out of the way right away, right? So when we make selections, I'm just going to navigate to a rectangular selection and just apply a rectangular selection to my image. This is holding information, right? It's saying, hey, Adam, you have made a selection. What do you intend to do with this selection? Now, there's a variety of things we can do with selections in edit mode. We can make adjustment layers. So I can just click on an adjustment layer. For example, this exposure adjustment. And you can see that my selection disappears in lieu of a mask. And that mask has that area that I've made a selection to, and it represents it in this exposure adjustment. So when I actually go to increase my exposure, you can see that that exposure, the increase of exposure is applied to the area that I have selected. And again, I'm just going to take a moment to bring us back to the definition of masking. Masking is a way of isolating a part of my image and altering it, right? Based on some form of adjustment that we're making. So the area that I've isolated in this example happens to be just a square. I've masked a square, right? Using the rectangular adjustment tool. That's really simple, right? Let's add a layer of complexity. So I'll just delete that. Let's do a selection of our background. So this is, again, an automated selection. So I'm selecting the background using an AI function in ACDSee, and you can see that it did a good job. It missed the cup, but it did a good job of getting all the other plates and cups in it in this water vessel right here. And so what we're going to do is we can then apply a change in the same way that we did with our rectangular selection. And the reason why is because the selection is holding information for us, right? It's saying like, hey, Adam, I've selected the background. What do you want to do now? What are you going to change to this image? So if I wanted to apply the exact same method, right, and click on the exposure adjustment, what I could do there is I could then increase the exposure of the background, right? So the area that I've masked in my image is I've said, hey, select everything but the subjects of my image. Select the background. I'm going to talk about this in more depth as we get further into the workshop, but I want to draw your attention to the mask thumbnail itself. So the mask thumbnail contains vital information about our image. In regards to this mask, let's just talk about what we've done, and I'll explain what we're seeing here. We have selected the background in our image using an automated function. I've shown how to make selections briefly, just using the rectangle tool, right? This process is no different. It's making a selection based on a criteria. The criteria is not a rectangle, it's an automated selection of the background. From there, I have that selection and I've clicked on any of my adjustment layers. In this case, I clicked on my exposure adjustment. But what it does is it takes that selection and it turns it into a mask in my image. So now what I have is I have isolated a specific area of my image from the rest. The area that I've isolated is the background, right? This is indicated by a sort of black and white relationship on a thumbnail. If we look at my thumbnail, it tells us really powerful information about masking. It tells us what areas of my image that this effect has been applied to and what areas of this image that it has not been applied to. The way that it tells us on and off is in relation to black and white. So we have parts of our image that are black, right? that is the area that exposure is not being applied. This is the area that was not isolated in my separation of my image. It was not selected in the process when I selected the background. These are the foreground elements that are unchanged. This is indicated by a black sort of area right here in our thumbnail. The areas that have changed are represented by the white portion, the area of my image that this exposure has been turned on, right? Let's just we'll do this in a different way too. I'm going to add an exposure adjustment to my image. And you've probably done this. You've probably added an exposure adjustment to your image because you wanted to increase the exposure on your image, and that's all, right? You just wanted to increase the overall brightness of the image, okay? And when you do that, when you click on your little exposure icon right here, the thumbnail still appears. The thumbnail has, in this case, valuable information about our image. And it tells us that our whole image, right? Our whole image is going to be subject to the exposure adjustment. In this case, what I haven't done is I haven't made any masking, in relation to specific parts of my image. The effect of the exposure is going to be universal. If we go back to our develop mode, for example, that's fine. Oops, discard this. If we go back to our develop mode, right? When we go into develop mode and we make any general adjustment, right? That's the exact same effect process. The effect is I'm going to make a universal change to my image, right? It doesn't incorporate a mask which identifies specific adjustments. To do that in develop mode, I would use this tool, the masking tool, right? We'll go back to this in edit mode briefly, and we'll look at an inverse relationship. So what I did a second ago was I selected my background and I masked my background. Let's now do something different. Let's select the subject, and it's probably going to do everything but the cup in the corner here. Nice. So you can see that my selection is now the opposite of what it was previously. The background is omitted, and the cups and plates as saucers are selected. That selection is indicated by that red right there that we see. Quick note. When you install ACDSee at the very beginning, you might have a selection overlay. So this overlay is the one you're seeing right here. It's indicated by this red sort of selection process. You might have something that looks more like this. It's called marching ants. It's very common in photo editing softwares. I'm not very fond of marching ants. And the reason why is because I sometimes have a hard time delineating between the parts of my image that I'm selecting and the parts of my image that I'm not selecting. Also, I find that it's a bit slower than just applying an overlay to my image. So what I do when I start ACDSee is I navigate to select, I go to overlay options, and I change it to selection highlighted. And then it gives me the ability to change the opacity of the overlay that I see, as well as the color that I'm seeing. I'll just stick with red because I think it's a default in this case. But to me, this is clear what is actually selected than marching ants. But I want to be clear that they are the same. They're the same thing. It is just methods of viewing a selection overlay. So when you go to make a selection, for example, when you go to make a lasso selection in your image, a classic selection method, right? You will probably see marching ants until you go to select overlay options and either change it or keep it. If you have a preference and you like marching ants, great. I just want you to know that that's what you're seeing, and those are the differences between the two. So when we go to select our subject using the AI selection process, our subjects are selected. Boom, awesome. And then what I go to do is, again, this selection is like a holding area. ACDSee is like waiting for me to tell the program what to do with it. Now, I could do something different than exposure. So what I could do is let's blur this part of my image. Okay. So I'm going to click on blur instead of exposure. And when I open blur, you'll see that the blur tool has popped open here, right? And I can change the blur adjustment. So I can really blur this part of my image. But note, importantly, okay, um, importantly, the blur indicates in this case an inverse relationship than the one we had before. And we can see this inverse relationship in our thumbnail. The background is treated as black in this selection, in this mask, sorry. And what that means is that the blur is not going to be adjusting the background. It's going to be adjusting the white part of our thumbnail, which is exactly what we've selected. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to make a connection between what you've selected and what the mask represents. And what the mask represents is this sort of black and white binary relationship. That black and white means on and off. Now, Paul asked a really good question. He asked, will you show us how to deselect the selecting glass, or alternatively to select the second glass? It doesn't matter in this case. This is a great suggestion, and I think one we can talk about. There's two ways to do this, and I'll show both. Actually, it's a great opportunity to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this blur adjustment layer, okay, with its corresponding mask. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start that selection process again. So I'm going to select my subject. And when I have a selection active, Paul, you can see it with the red there, right? What I can do is I can, in this case, ACDSee and its automated selection process did a pretty good job. It didn't do a great job, but it did a pretty good job. And the reason why it didn't select this cup right here is because it's slightly out of focus. The areas in the center here are clearly in focus. The area that is this cup right here is more out of focus. But I'm going to add this cup to the selection process, because me clicking select subject, again, all it introduces is this holding area, this space that, okay, what do you want to do with this space, Adam? Well, one of the things I can do with this space is continue to add selections to it. For example, just to give you a quick idea, I'm in the lasso tool here, but there's all these different selection tools. I have the brush selection tool, the shape selection tool, the rectangular selection tool, the elliptical selection tool, the lasso selection tool, and the magic wand. Just to be clear, Rodrigo is going to be covering these in depth in his next workshop. I won't be. My point here is that selections are how you can incorporate elements into a mask. Just to keep it simple, though, for example, if I wanted to make a little selection and add it to my selection here, right? You can see that now this lasso selection right here has now been added to this quote unquote holding area where I want to, I want to do something to this image. I want to add that as a part of the thing that I'm going to be masking, right? I can remove it, and I'm going to remove it by using these tools here. So a quick note that I'm in the lasso selection tool. When I'm in the plus form of the lasso tool, I can add to my active selection. So the selection that I made using the select subject tool, I can add to that. I can remove from it using this tool right here, right there. So I'm just going to click around using the subtract from selection and removes it. So Paul asked, how do we deselect the second glass? So what I could do is I could use the lasso tool, subtract it from selection, and then I could just make a quick manual subtraction from my automated select subject process. Now, that's actually a really good question. I don't know if there is. Oh, just shift. So if I click shift, it turns plus. And yeah, and then, yeah, exactly. So if I click here, and then this one's control probably. Yeah. Okay. Control. No, that's not working. Let's try that. Okay. I'm noticing that it works very much when I go to use the okay, so the question that Peter asked is how do I toggle between the two? And it looks like you toggle between the two by uh holding shift. Uh and then you can go to control, but it's very slow. So anyway, I'm going to just continue to use these icons. For some reason mine's not working very fast to toggle between the two. But there is, if you hover over the tool itself, it indicates that it's either shift or control. Looks like the first tool might also showcase. Yeah, it's just the shift and control that are toggleable. But so what I did here is I had an active selection, my select subject, right? And then what I did is based on Paul's suggestion, he's like, well, how do you actually remove the cup from that selection process? Well, you can do that by navigating to any selection tool while you have an active selection, and then either adding to it, right? Add to selection or subtracting from selection. Let's do the inverse of what we have here. Um, let's actually add these cups back in just to illustrate how we would do that. And instead of using the lasso tool, because it would require some really amazing pen work on my hand, I'm actually just going to use this shape selection tool. So it's the second from the list here. Shape selection tool, I can just zoom in on my subject here. And then what it's going to allow me to do is just draw like literally along my subject here. I'm just going to add this in. So I can go through and I can just add my cup in and I can do a fairly good job of, and again, the important element of this is that my polygon selection tool or my shape tool here is just set to the plus mode. And then when I double click, I should be able to add one more here. Let's see. Oh, I think it'll want me to commit that. There we go. Commit it. And then I can once again open up the shape selection tool, and then I can just add in this cup as well. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to add these to my masking process. So I'm going to make an active selection of these cups using selection tools available to me. And then that will be incorporated into the final mask. Again, all I've shown here is the addition of these cups using the shape tool, and sort of I showed earlier the sort of subtraction process involved with the lasso tool. So hopefully what you can see now, Paul, is that these have been added to my active selection. Shape tool is pretty cool, actually. It's one of my favorite tools, and it's very easy to use. So obviously the selection tools do very different things. The brush selection tool allows you to add to your selections, but it uses your pen nib. And you're probably familiar with this already, especially if you've used develop mode, right? It's just going to look like a pen nib and adding onto that selection. Again, Rodrigo will cover these next week. Shape selection tool allows you to sort of add these points. One of the things that I didn't actually showcase is that when you go through using the shape selection tool, it gives you the ability to adjust curves. So let's see if I can do this. Forget how to do this. Let me see. Oh yeah, it's done in the center here. You can add a node in between sections here. And what that does is it actually adds curvature to your shape. So if I really wanted to do an incredible selection, I would have added curvature to those sections there. But hopefully everyone can see that between points, um, that can add a curve to your shape selection. Okay, so selections aside, I have now these cups highlighted, isolated in my selection process, and then I can go forward and apply a adjustment layer to those images or to this section of my image to again to isolate them, and in this case apply some form of effect, right? So what I've done here is I've applied a blur effect. Now, um, we can do the same thing with masks themselves. So this introduces the sort of next element of our workshop here. So let's just summarize what we've covered so far. We've looked at really simple masking methods. So we talked about in develop mode what the simple masking methods look like there, right? We looked at using AI functions and the brush functions within that. We took that and then we applied it to edit mode because we were able to showcase how select subject and select background work in adding something to your selection. What we've also isolated is that any of these selection tools, the brush selection tool, the shape selection tool, the rectangular selection tool, etc., can all add selections to basically they can add a selection overlay. And from there, what you can do is you can apply effects. Those effects that you apply using these adjustment layers will be masked, right? We did that with the rectangle selection. We made a rectangle and then we applied an exposure adjustment, and that rectangle is the area that was subject to those adjustments, right? So really simple stuff using develop mode, and then slightly more complicated ones using selections and AI actions in ACDSee and the edit mode, sorry. Now let's take this to the next level. Okay, now let's sort of begin the process of really understanding masking, manual and otherwise. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new image, just a brand new image file. We're going to make it we'll just make it 5,000 by 5,000 pixels. It really doesn't matter. So all I did was navigate to File and New, and I'm going to add a brand new image at 5,000 by 5,000 pixels and click OK. And when I open this up, you'll see that my image is entirely devoid of pixel content. There are no digital number values for any of the pixels in my image. It is blank. Okay. David Byrne asked a good question. How do you commit a mask as a layer? How do you commit a mask as a layer? Do you commit a mask as a layer? When you're making a selection, right? Say I've made a circular selection. Then it's all you need to do is add an adjustment layer to it, and then it commits that mask to my image. You can see that the mask is created, right? And what we can also do is what I'm about to show you, where you can add a mask to a raw image. So masks are also located underneath the adjustment layers panel, and it adds a mask to a raw image devoid of a subject, a selection process. But that's the topic of what we're going to talk about right now. So we'll just put that on pause so we can sort of go through this naturally. So what I have here is a layer that's empty. Okay. Within that, we want to showcase manual masking. So masking that doesn't incorporate selection tool processes or AI actions. And as David asked, how does that look like? What does it look like to commit a mask to an image? And we'll showcase how that works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my layer here. Okay. I have a blank layer currently. So this layer contains no visual information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the paint bucket tool. I'm going to select a color using the foreground picker, and I'm just going to fill this with red. Okay. I'm going to take a red selection with the foreground. I'll click OK, and I'm going to simply click anywhere in my layer. With the fill bucket tool, provided that there's no content in your image, it will fill your image with the color. So I've added a red layer to my image. I'm going to right click on my layer and I'm just going to rename it red. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the foreground color tool here and I'm going to fill it with blue. So now I have a red layer and a blue layer, and you can see that those are indicated on the right-hand side here. So, masking. Layers are always, there's a hierarchy when it comes to layers. And what I mean by that is the image that you see at the top, in this case, our blue square, will take visual priority over the layer that appears beneath it, which is the red square. Okay. That visual priority is only interrupted by or altered by masking processes. For example, remember that rectangular selection we made earlier? Well, let's do that again. Let's take our rectangle. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw on our image here a little square. Okay. Right in the center of my image. And you can see that that overlay once again appears. Okay. That red overlay. And again, this is a holding area. This is telling me, hey, Adam, you have a selection active. What do you want to do with that? Previously, we used exposure adjustments and blur adjustments within the adjustment layers themselves, these buttons right here in this section. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do here is we're going to click on this button, which actually adds a layer mask to the image itself. This layer mask will correspond to selections in the same way that they did with adjustment layers. Let me click on it. Okay. So there's my square based on my rectangular selection, but it's changed my image relationship. Now, as you can see, my blue layer, right? In the same way that if I was to add an exposure adjustment, there's my little thumbnail, my mask thumbnail for my exposure adjustment, okay? In the same way that it works there, I've added one for a image itself, right? Devoid of a adjustment that corresponds to it. Now I'm just masking my image with no other effects. Let's have a look at this thumbnail. So this thumbnail says to us, hey, Adam, the center part of your image that you've selected using the selection tool, that's going to be shown to you. Okay. So I'm going to turn that portion on, right? What I'm going to turn is the bottom portion off. So the black portion of my thumbnail, the part that you didn't select, I'm going to turn that off. And that's indicated by this black and white relationship in our thumbnail. So here's a question, open-ended question, simple question. If I was to make my entire mask thumbnail black, what color would be presented to me in my image here? What would I be looking at? Tom's right. It's like a hole cut into a blank piece of paper, or the edges cut around it. So you're all right. The color would be red. Let's illustrate that. So if I right click on my mask, right, and I set my mask as black, which it's going to completely remove the rectangle selection process that I did. It's just going to create this as a black mask. Now I see red, right? Okay. So this blue has been turned off from view. And the next thing in our visual priority, the layer that appears beneath it, is going to be visible. Okay, let's remove this mask. And let's move our red to the top of our layer party. Red appears again, right? Same thing. Let's just do a circle instead this time. I'm going to make elliptical selection right in the center of my image. Okay. So I've made an elliptical selection. probably would be a good time to change my overlay color so everyone can see that. There's my overlay. Okay, so we can see what my active selection looks like. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the add a layer mask. Okay, and when I do that, red appears right in the center here. And my blue that appears around it, the area that I have not selected, appears as the area of my image that is turned off in the red portion and turned off in our main image here. So then it is shown in the layer that appears beneath it. Okay, Pablito asked a question. Why you don't change red to not be mixed with masking color? Oh, well, I just did that. Yeah, that's probably what you were mentioning. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's in this case, it's it's a bit silly to have a red masking color when I'm working with a bright red color as well, but you see my point. So, let's look at this in a different way now. Okay. So we've looked at this in relation to masking with just these raw layers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this layer mask from the red portion here, and we'll talk about image appearance. So, um, so this red layer appears above the blue layer. Masking, right, is about separating or isolating specific areas of an image from the rest, right? So, there's ways that we can incorporate this red into the layer that appears beneath it. The first method is masking. The second method is to reduce the opacity of the layer itself. You can see that when I reduce the opacity, essentially when I remove 50% of the pixels in my red image on top here, then it merges with the blue that appears beneath it visually, and I get this sort of magenta color that you see here. The same is true if I go even further down, and now you can see around 25% of the pixels in my image, it appears purple beneath it, right? Same for 0. 0 is almost or it is the same actually as applying a black mask to my image because it's functionally turning it off. The third one, which is beyond the scope of this workshop, but it's actually blend modes. These are ways to sort of blend this topmost layer with the layers that appear beneath it. So the three methods by which we can see the layer beneath my most hierarchical layer, the topmost layer, is masking, blend modes, and opacity. Let's do something completely different. Let's just add a regular white mask to my image here. I'm going to add it to my red layer by clicking on the layer mask. It adds a mask, okay? And then what I can do is I can just go up to the topmost portion of my section here, and I'll go to the fill tools. I'm going to navigate to the regular brush tool. I want to ensure that I've clicked on the red portion here, right? Or sorry, the mask itself. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm working in the inverse relationship. So I'm coloring on, or I'm adding, in this case, brushing on black to a portion of my image over top of my white mask. So when I do that, I can do masking based on whatever I've drawn here. So when I've drawn in this case, a smiley face, and you can see that my thumbnail, right, matches what I've drawn. So the thumbnail represents the black, which has been turned off in my image, and therefore it then references the image that appears beneath it. Okay. And so this image that appears beneath it is this blue portion here, and that's visualized to me. Okay. All that said, okay, let's actually apply this methodology to a real image, because right now I'm just working with red and blue, and it makes it easier to understand what's going on in terms of my image. Hopefully what it showcases to you that hierarchy matters, masks can be added to any image, And then using a relationship of on and off, we can turn, or black and white in this case, we can turn parts of our images off, right? So this is completely distinct from using adjustment layers that come preset with a mask. We're working with layers now and adding masks to them to mask components out. So let's just do a really simple mask execution on, one of my images. Okay. So I'll navigate away from my smiley face and we'll just find a really simple image to mask what I mean. Let's navigate to, let's navigate to just even um, a simple sky sort of related image here. So, just to illustrate this, okay? So we have our base image here. That's our image. We can go through the process of adding a mask. Okay, so here I am adding a mask. And when I add a mask, that little thumbnail appears, right? And now let's say that I mask everything underneath this this mountain range off. I brush on black. What appears when I do that? What appears underneath this base image here when I go through the process of turning that part of my image off? Yeah, absolutely. So Randy, Ali, Vasilios, Eric, Bill, Pavlito, nothing is the answer to that, right? So when I go through the process of masking that off, that's turned off, right? So now what I can do with this is, given that this image is transparent, right? I can completely change what appears in my image based on what appears beneath it, right? So if I was to take a completely different image, drag and drop, and this is going to look really silly right now, but just bear with me. Take a completely different image and, navigate to the bottom here. I move it to the bottom. I can completely change the relationship of this image based on the masking that I've done. Okay. So I have a completely different image that appears beneath it with my sort of mountain range selection on the top, predicated on this mask that I have. So there's my active mask with the topmost portion of my image turned on and the bottommost portion of my image turned off. So pause. What have we covered? So we looked at just simple masking, right? Very simple stuff. Making selections, changing based on those selections. So when we look at an image in develop mode or something like that, right? Let's go back to our other folder. We have our image here and we're doing something as simple as masking the subject. We're going to change something about the subject. We'll take our subject selection and then just in this mode, we'll, I don't know, change the temperature of the object itself, right? So this is a classic mask. It's isolating a specific part of my image and then altering it. We then looked at that same process, right? We looked at that exact same process in relation to edit mode, what that looks like in edit mode. Well, it looks like a lot of things. You can make selections using selection tool, right? Selection tools, adding adjustments to them, right? Just based on simple areas in our image, okay? So simple rectangle selection exposure. We can use preset methods of selection, right? We can select our subjects, right? We can do an automated function here and then mask based on that, right? Here I am masking my subjects and, highlighting them in this case, right? We can do more complicated selections, right? We can add a mask to our image based on what we were talking about earlier, right? We can add a mask to our image and we can mask entire parts of our image out without the use of selections entirely, right? We can just go through a manual selection process and add a new subject or add a new image to appear in the vacancy of the image that we had previously. So that sort of represents a very simple masking, like automated masking using AI actions, and then sort of intermediate masking. Now what we're doing is we're masking two images together using layers, right? We're using masking in conjunction with the brush tool or different layers of opacity and using like nib width and feathering and all these things to sort of blend images together. There's two other very powerful methods of selection, right? Let's just answer a question here first. Yeah, we do, Pablito. We have absolutely have feathering options. Um, let's isolate that and show you what that looks like. So when we're masking, right? So if we've selected our subject here and we want to mask our subject. So here I have a masked version of my subject. I selected my subject and I masked it. I can feather that subject against the background. So let's just fill the background really quickly with the colors so we can see this. I'm just going to fill it with, let's fill with, I don't know, purple. So what I can do here is I can use this feathering on my selected subject to blur the edges of it, right? The other thing I can do, same thing, is when I'm in the process of working with this image, okay, and I have a mask applied to it right here, like that. What I can do is I can feather using the brush itself as I mask out an image, a part of my image. So for example, if I was to take my brush, right, and let's say I'm in the process of brushing away everything else, right? I can go through the process of using feathering to sort of increase the area that I'm removing, right? John asked, when adding an additional photo as layers, does it have to be in the current film strip? No, that's a great question. So let's showcase that. So for example, let's take here, let's do this. Let's highlight our layer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my subject again. Hopefully it does a pretty good job. I'll fill in the glass base here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take my pen tool and I'll use the brush selection tool here to just add this base portion to the selection. I didn't showcase this earlier, but I'm showcasing it now. So what I'm doing is I have an active selection as indicated by this overlay color that I should really change back to red. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just adding in this portion of the glass that the automated method didn't catch. And I'm just going to go in and I'm going to add it. Okay. And so now I have an active selection that incorporates this base part of my image here. Okay. Uh, there's feathering in develop mode when it comes to the brush selection for sure. I have an active selection of my cup here. Let's mask it. So I've taken my active selection that I added. Let's get rid of this red corner here as well. And let's mask it and see what it looks like. So not bad, not the worst. Let's add another image that we're going to use as a background. Okay. And again, this is going to probably look pretty silly, but I'll do my best to maybe make it not the worst. Let's navigate to, I don't know, I just want an image of a table. But all I did here was click on the add a file as a layer, and it brings up the browse function, which allows me to search all over my computer for a different image, right? So it doesn't have to be from the thumbnail in this case. I think comedically, I'm going to navigate to this same folder though, because I really want a table, and I think there's one in this folder. So I'm just trying to remember which one this is. I think it was objects. Yeah. Okay. So let's say I want to just do this. I want to add this background, my image here. You know, justifying it in the space horribly, but I've added a background image here with my active selection. So now I have my subject, in this case, that I've made a selection of, and I have my background. In this case, I just added a table, background to my my selection of my image here. Again, not perfect. I would need to really edit this image in order to justify it in the space and make it look like it fits. But I was able to go and navigate to another file that I wanted to add in the background using that. Okay, so let's show you two different tools. Okay, so we've covered a lot of different masking functions, some of them simple, some of them more complicated. Hopefully the whole using those blue and red layers really illustrate to you the differences, illustrate to you the powers of masking and sort of how much you can do, even aside from just making selections of your image and using adjustment layers. Hopefully, what it shows to you, like we've done here, is you can make entire parts of your images, you can isolate them or remove them and then apply or add new layers, something that is completely new to your image altogether, right? So there's two other very powerful semi-automated methods of masking. Let's go over them. Let's go over the channel selection. Let's go over luminance and color range first. So we talked about previously using AI actions to make selections. Okay. So we did AI select subject and background. We talked about the selection tools to make selections in our image that we then went on to make masks with. The other ones we can use are luminance and color range, which is within the selection function. What this does is it allows us to mask portions of our image based on luminance and the range of color that we see. So, for example, if I was to take my image here, and you can see that one of the things that's primary about my image here is that sort of red appearance of my cup. So we'll keep that in consideration when we go through the process of using luminance and color range. So luminance and color range adds an active selection based on some values. So right here, I have like a pretty broad range of a brightness, right? And shadows, but I can pull those values inwards to incorporate more elements that I see here. So I can go in and I can really broaden this range to make sure that I'm incorporating more shadows or highlights into my image, as you can see sort of by the overlay as it changes on my image here. Moreover, what I can do is I can take this color range wheel and I can highlight entire different color ranges within my image predicated on where the hue is on the color range bar. So for example, if I wanted to really select those reds in my image, right, I could broaden this wheel to select the reds in the topmost portion of my cocktail here. And then I can go through and widen those to incorporate more or less if I wanted to. Or I could only focus on desaturated reds. Or alternatively, I could only focus on high saturation reds, right? So I can do that by engaging with this color range wheel and luminance range. When I go through the process of clicking OK, let me just get a bit more in that range here. There we go. What it's going to do is it's actually going to, once again, just add an active selection. Okay. And that active selection is then useful for creating masking. One of the things to note about this, luminance and color range selection process is that because it is it's sort of being applied to my image, but it's looking at all the pixels in my image to any that contain, in this case, red with medium degrees of brightness, portions of my image at the bottom were selected here. And the way that we can approach removing those is we can just take something like the brush selection tool here, and by right clicking on my image, I actually can deselect those from my active selection. And the same is the case here. What I can do is I can zoom in on this cup here and just gently remove this selection from my cup as well. And so when I go to actually make an adjustment layer, right, such as say hue, so I'll click on vibrance and I can adjust the hue. You can see that that hue is masked according to the color range that we've selected. So if you're trying to highlight certain brightness or color ranges in your image, this might be a better tool than using a manual selection process. And it certainly would be a better process than trying to use a subject or background selection, right? So this is a whole new way of selecting ranges within your image. In this case, all we did was highlight red using luminance and color range at sort of a broad range of brightnesses in my image. And now I can go through the process of masking this accordingly. In this case, I have my mask right here in my vibrance adjustment. And you can see that it's all present there. The other thing we can do is we can take that same image again. Let's go through the same luminance and color range process. Just broadly the same here. I'll just try to mimic it as fast as I can. There it is. Remove the bottom. You can do this to select a portion of your image. Oops. Just brush those out. And what we can do from here is we can actually make a mask of just this portion of our image. So for example, I could go ahead and I can duplicate a layer. So for example, this cup layer here, and then I can mask over top of the layer that I've duplicated. So let's rename this just the red part of cup. And I will click on mask with, again, the active selection here. When I go to do that, hopefully everybody can see that the red part of the cup here is the only part of my image that has been masked. So if I wanted to remove the other layers, you can see what I've masked. That's the portion of my image that I can make adjustments to. So if I wanted to, let's say, I don't know, let's say I wanted to do something really funky with just this layer, right? Let's say I wanted to increase, I don't know, noise maybe in this layer. How do I do that? Let's see here. Oops. Yeah, noise. So let's just increase the noise in this one portion of my image here. Oh, that doesn't seem to be applying to that bottom portion. Here's another way of doing this. I could apply a noise reduction process, or could add like a clarity to this layer. And so I can really add an intense amount of, adjustment in this case to the topmost portion. Now I'm working with this top, the red coupe part of my image based on a channel selection. I could, apply I don't know, like a posterizing effect or something like that of just that part of my image, So adding a sense of grain or whatever to that. But the point is that based on a channel selection, I can then go on and I can create all sorts of different effects based on that. This introduces a mask for me, right? The other method, and one that's quite powerful as well, I'll go into a different image to illustrate this, would be this guy right here. So I have this image and it has a lot of magenta in my image. One of the things that I could do is I can apply a channel selection. So here I have a channel selection on my image here. So all I do is I go to select and channel selection. And channel selection basically gives me the ability to isolate a certain wavelength in my image. So in terms of a spectrum of light, we can isolate red, green, or blue. In terms of sort of more specific CMYK values, I could outline cyan, magenta, yellow, blacks. I can highlight lab color and then as well as hue, saturation, and lightness. And so it gives me the ability to break down these wavelengths in my image and focus on specific values. I think red is a good value here, right? Because the red is the predominant value in the portion of my image here. And then I can adjust the levels of the area that I want to focus on using this wheel here. And so what I can do from within channel selection is I can set it as a selection right away, or I can set it as a mask right away. So if I wanted to set as a selection, it'll go ahead and select that portion of my image. And then from there, what I can do is I could, what would we want to do to this? I could actually increase the exposure. And you can see that as I go about the process of adding exposure to my image here, you can see that my mask corresponds exactly to the channel selection that I made in my image. So my channel selection now represents the area that is represented to me in my exposure adjustment here. This is a very powerful tool, like the ability to just go in and impact specific parts of a wavelength. Super strong. And this is obviously something that might be more applicable and used more often than, say, manual selection methods that I illustrated earlier. And the reason why is because they're more designed for general application changes to an image rather than focusing on creating a composition image. The tools that I was showcasing earlier about masking, using the pen or the nib tool, the brush tool, those were sort of intended for creating composition images, taking two images and putting them together. This is taking a pre-existing image and masking in correspondence with some range or wavelength of color. Okay, let's answer some questions. Can you save a mask to apply to different layers or even a different project? You can save a mask. This is actually a hugely powerful tool too. So let's say I go in and I go to this channel selection, right? And I focus on red and I want to do, I don't know, I want to do only these versions of red. Robert, do you see how I have an active selection here? That sort of red highlight is now present in my image again. Well, hopefully you see that. One of the things you can see from here is I can actually navigate to a tool called selection basket, or sorry, yeah, selection basket. There we go. And what the selection basket tool does is it allows us to save active selections or active masks. For example, here, so you can see that if I had a currently selected layer mask, I could add it to the basket, or I could add a current selection to the basket. So I have a selection, it's been added to the basket. So if I was to go in and make an adjustment to this layer, let's say I adjust curves, right? Let's adjust the curves. Let's do something different where, okay, so I have a curves adjustment, but you see that I've lost that selection, right? Well, let's go in and add a vibrance adjustment or maybe like a white balance adjustment, okay? So what I can do is I can take this selection that I have here, right? And then I can apply it to this mask, which is a completely different mask. So it means that I don't need to go through the process of running those same selections over and over and over again. So what I can do is, let's see if I can move this here. No, I don't want to do that. I want to set the selection as a mask of the currently selected layer. So if I click on that, you can see that the white balance has changed. It corresponds to the channel selection I made earlier. And now I can warm my image or cool my image to correspond to that. Do you see how that works, Robert? This is a hugely powerful tool. So this is working exclusively within masking and also selections, right? And how they correspond with one another. Masks aren't typically something that you save. There's typically relative to the image that you're working on. They're not typically ones that you select in one image and then apply it to a different image. But making a selection in one image, you can save using the selection basket process. So taking something as simple as even a mask, right? Let's say we've masked our image. And let's say we've gone through the process of masking out this, tree or whatever in my, oops. Let's say we've done a really good job of masking this tree out in my image here, right? One of the things I can do is I can take this mask that I have, right, that I like, and I can go through the process of literally adding that mask to the selection basket like this. So now I've gone in and I've added not only a channel selection, right, but I've also gone in and add masks that I like as well. So this is really useful when you have composition images that you want to have the same masks in your image. So you have multiple layers and you want to apply the same mask over and over and over. And so then what we can do is, now that I have that selection, let's say I have a completely different image, in here, whatever, right? I could go in and then I could add this same, let's see here. I'll just add a blank layer just to illustrate this really quickly. Let's add a red to my layer. What I could do is then I can apply some form of, pardon me, of selection process then to my corresponding image layer here. So if I wanted to set this selection as a mask of the currently selected layer, and then I don't know, I could invert that or whatever to have that some sort of relationship there. There's so many incremental levels of control here. So just to illustrate what I mean. Okay, so we talked about a lot today, all in relation to masking. So I'll just to reiterate a little bit. We looked at sort of simple masking that you would already do in develop mode, right? We looked at AI masking. Then we looked at AI masking or sort of the relationship of selections to masking, and how masking can be both predicated on selections, but also predicated on just masking an image on its own. And so when we introduced the sort of red and blue layer, I illustrated to you how to mask a layer using the add a layer mask button here to a current layer. And then I just showcased the relationship between that white and black binary over the layer thumbnail, and sort of showcasing how to mask just using the brush tools. Then I just showcased a couple extra tools. This as much as this is a process about masking, masks are really about selections. So we talked about channel selection and luminance color range selections as well, right? And so looking at making selections of specific color ranges or wavelengths within color as well. So hopefully what that does is it gives you a really firm grasp of the tools present here in terms of masking. It gives you a degree of control, especially when it comes to composition images, where you can start blending certain parts of your image together. And it just gives you a foundational understanding as well. So there's a lot there. Masks in general are something you already interact with on a daily basis using ACDSee, but you might not know what you're doing in your image. Anytime you're making a highlight in develop mode of you're warming an image, or you're selecting a portion of your image predicated on color, you're doing the process of masking. But now you sort of understand what that looks like in relation to like layers, how now adding all these different layers in regards to it adds different levels of control in terms of masking. Yeah, if there's any other questions, fire them in the Q&A panel. Helmet asked, can you tell us how to add adjustment layers Selection. Can you tell us how to add more adjustment layers to one selection or layer? Oh, okay. So you've got one layer. How do you, well, I think we actually just kind of covered this, but I'll show it again. So we have an adjustment layer, right? A vibrance adjustment, and maybe that vibrance adjustment is predicated on a selection. So we have our, let's just do a quick channel selection, red, add a selection, vibrance adjustment. There you go. So now we have a increase of saturation and lightness over this vibrance adjustment, right? So now if we want to add further adjustments, right? So we wanted to let's add a blank layer, okay? And then let's add a blue gradient. See if it'll let me do this. So you see that blue gradient, commit this layer. So I have a layer above this. Say I have reduced opacity on my layer. Actually, let's leave it at full opacity. Let's make a mask of this layer. So I've added a mask to my gradient. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and I don't know, I'll paste my the same selection, the luminance selection I had earlier. And so now I have this like blue overlay in a gradient over top of my image. So here we have multiple layers, one of which is a vibrance adjustment, one of which is just a gradient that I've applied a pre-existing selection or mask to, right? So we have multiple layers with sort of various levels of adjustments that are being applied to an image here. I'm not sure if that answers your question exactly, but I mean, everything that we're doing here is working with multiple layers. So more than one adjustment going on at the same time. Anyway, yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions that anyone may have? We covered a ton today. I feel like, yeah, definitely over an hour. So thanks, Ed. Thank you, Laurent. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Helmut. Thank you, Jack. Hopefully people got Catherine. Thanks lots, Adam. Oh yeah. This is gonna be tough on the computer. Learning for a while. Awesome. I'm glad that helps. Yeah, special steps to saving a final image. Paul, that's a good question. It's a pretty general question, but we have time, so let's answer it. When it depends on whether or not you want to edit it in the future or not. When working in edit mode, I typically save a file as a non-destructive file. So I would go to File, Save As, and I would save in this format. So this ACDSee file format allows you to edit this image in the future, Paul. So you could go in and you could change these masks if you wanted to. Okay. Thank you, Alex. Oh, just send it to me on the over our community portal. Just fire me an email, or not an email, but a direct message there. That's how I get. So I sent out a message earlier today, just reminding people about the workshop. And if you can literally respond to that. I think and you should be able to, yeah. But please. So if I was to save this as an ACDSee file format, Paul, that would enable me to edit this image in the future. I would be able to edit these layers that I have going on here. However, if I just want to flatten this image and I have no intention of, engaging with this image in the future, then I would just save it as like a JPEG, a PNG, or a TIFF file, but saving it as an ACDSee file format, for example, editable file, March 22nd, right? Save that. Boom. When I go to save that, one of the benefits of this is that if I was to navigate away, right? I'm in a completely working on different images and I want to come back to that image in the future. So where did I put it? I put it in the objects folder. So here it is. I have my ACDSee file format right here, this editable file, March 22nd. So if I was to navigate to edit mode, right, and go into this file, then I can increase opacities on these layers. I can change the vibrance and saturation values. all of which would not be possible if this layer was flattened. Thanks, Adam. Where can I send a follow-up questions? Yeah, tried to send a message to realize it bounced. Oh, weird. It bounced. It bounced over the community portal, Alex? It wouldn't let you go through? Anyway, Paul, does that answer your question in terms of the final steps to save the image? I don't know if that answers your question, but oh, okay, sweet. Yeah, as long as if you intend to edit the image in the future, save it as an ACDSee file. That gives you the ability to edit these layers. If you're intending to just have a copy of your image and just save it down as a compressed file. ACDSee file formats is going to be pretty big. Like it's going to be a lot larger than say your your initial image would be, right? But the benefit is that it's editable. So there is a trade-off in terms of what you gain in editable qualities, non-destructiveness. You lose a little bit in file size. Okay, let me have a look. Just have a little quick look. Should be fine, I imagine.